Welcome to the second video in the pregnancy lesson. We're going to start this video off with implantation. So this is the figure that we were going through when we dropped off from the last video. Remember, we started the fertilization. We're going counterclockwise around. We stopped at the blastocyst stage, and it's at this stage where you're within the uterus and you're getting ready to implant. So for implantation to take place, you have to have progesterone around and maybe estrogen as well. The progesterone prepares the uterine wall for implantation. Largely what it does, although we'll talk about more details in a second, it maintains that endometrial layer in a nice fluffy big state ready for this blastocyst to come and comfortably nestle down and begin the process of implantation. So you want to have that nice big endometrial layer that progesterone builds up late in the menstrual cycle. And we talked about that in the female reproductive lesson. The blastocyst attaches to the uterine wall, and that's sort of like what you see here. This is the endometrium, and this is the developing trophoblast. The uterine wall reacts and prepares the endometrial component of the placenta. So histamine and prostaglandin are required for this. And basically what's happening here in a nutshell is you have structures in the area which are going to become either fetus or placenta. And when we talk about placenta, we're talking about endometrial components of the female mother. We're talking about components of the placenta which are formed by the fetus itself. So, you know, the placenta is formed by the interdigitation of the two. Okay, so basically implantation begins that development. All right. So at some point, the mother's body has to know that it's pregnant, because if it doesn't know, then what's going to happen is the corpus luteum is going to disappear, and you're going to start another menstrual cycle, and you will have no more embryo if that happens. So at some point, the female reproductive system has to recognize that it's pregnant, so that you can keep that corpus luteum intact and you can keep secreting progesterone, which is essential for the maintenance of pregnancy. And this is what's known as recognition. Okay, so how is that recognition achieved? It's through this hormone called chorionic gonadotropin, or for our purposes, human chorionic gonadotropin, HCG. Okay. It is secreted by the embryo and more specifically by syncytiotrophoblasts cells of the placenta. So these are cells, they are part of the embryonic placental villi, which form and are going to become part of the placenta. So these villi, as I'll show you in a moment, are actually invading and implanting themselves into the endometrial layer. And they are actually what secretes this and lets the female reproductive system know, hey, I'm here, don't eject me. Okay? In the pregnant female, prevents disintegration of the corpus luteum. That is its main target, and by doing that, you maintain secretion of progesterone from the corpus luteum. So what's going to happen is this HCG is going to hang around as long as the corpus luteum has to be there to produce progesterone. Eventually what's going to happen is the placenta is going to produce enough progesterone on its own to where HCG is not necessary and the corpus luteum is not necessary anymore. And then the corpus luteum is going to disappear because the progesterone is being maintained by the placenta itself. And so that's actually shown in this graph. So you see here we have our progesterone coming from the corpus luteum during the menstrual cycle. It rises. HCG starts to appear about 6 to 7 days after fertilization. And as long as it's around, this corpus luteum is maintained and continues to secrete progesterone. And the reason for that, as I'm going to show you in the next video, or as I'm going to explain to you, is because the structure of HCG is very, very similar to the structure of LH. So LH binds to the corpus luteum and causes progesterone secretion. HCG is going to do that. And as long as it's around doing that, the corpus luteum will hang around. So you can see HCG builds, progesterone is maintained, and eventually the progesterone is not coming from the corpus luteum anymore, it's coming from the placenta. And when the placenta is producing enough, the HCG level drops, the corpus luteum involutes, disappears because it's no longer necessary, the placenta is performing its function basically at that point, and you don't need it anymore. So you don't need the HCG anymore, it drops, okay? And that's about 15 weeks of pregnancy, all right? All right. Let's talk a little bit about the placenta. This is a nice figure. The syncytiotrophic blast extensions differentiate and become the chorionic villus. That's what you see here. So these villi are sticking into the endometrial layer and sticking into the uterus so that the fetus can become attached, right? And it's going to form this fetal-maternal interface for exchange of materials. So this chorionic villus joins the maternal circulation in the intervillous space. That is here. This is the intervillous space. And so this is filled with maternal fluids. You can see the maternal artery here, the maternal vein here, draining out the fluids. So this is where the exchange takes place. You've got the fetal part of the placenta sticking in. You've got this space where the exchange takes place between the maternal fluids and the fetal blood, okay? The circulation between the two established within 3 weeks of fertilization. And as we'll see in a moment, you are mediating nutrient and waste exchange, nutrients going into the fetus, waste like urea and so carbon dioxide and so forth going out, okay, into the mother. This is the interface between this placenta is the interface between the fetal circulation, the chorion, and the maternal circulation, the maternal portion of the placenta. This is the fetal portion. The maternal portion is called the decidua basalis, okay? And these two portions come together and they mediate this exchange, the interface between the two circulations. The presence of the placenta, before we go any further, does have cardiovascular functional implications. We're not going to talk a lot about that. They may talk more about it in women's health, and if not, you will certainly address it in the floors during year M3 here. But I think this makes some sense to you. This is a lot of mass, right? And so that mass has to be supported, through increased circulation. And so there'll be no surprise to anyone that there's an increased cardiac output during pregnancy to supply this. There's a lot of fluid in here, and that has consequences as well. So increased cardiac output, and the velocity of flow is low. That's very similar to most capillaries, where you guys will recall in the vital, when we talked about this in vital fluids, the capillary velocity of flow is pretty slow to allow maximal exchange to take place. The same thing's true here in the placenta. You want to maximize the amount of time for diffusion and such to take place between the two circulations, and so the velocity of the flow is fairly slow. And of course, you don't want a lot of pulsations in here, which might dislodge a developing embryo. You want it to be nice and happy and comfortable, securely fastened onto that uterine wall. Okay. So this figure sort of represents the placental exchange. This is the barrier that controls the exchange of things between the mother and the fetus. As I said before, it carries nutrients in, oxygen, water and electrolytes, and waste out. urea, other sorts of waste, carbon dioxide, they go out. You'll notice that these four things at the top are simple diffusion. No transporters necessary, they just go right across. But there are substances like carbohydrates, lipids, amino acids, and vitamins that do require special transporters. So you can imagine this being like an epithelial layer, and these substances getting across through what amounts to transcellular transport through the layer. Okay, and so there are transporters required to get these things across. So both forms of transport take place. All right. Let's talk a little bit about the placenta as a endocrine organ that does make and secrete hormones. Okay, we have extensive exchange of precursors and hormones between the mother. Cholesterol, DHE is a androgen. Both of these serve as precursors here to synthesis in the placenta of estradiol and progesterone. And over here, we have more androgen produced by the fetus, and that feeds in here as well, okay? Then, of course, we have the synthesis itself going on in the placenta. Once again, progesterone and estradiol, the major products here. Remember, the progesterone, when you're secreting enough progesterone here from the placenta, that means that your HCG can go down and you can stop secreting it from the corpus luteum and it can go away. A significant source of estrogen as well. And again, a lot of exchange takes place between the placenta and the fetus and the mother in terms of the production and maintenance of these hormones in both places, okay? Both in the fetus and in the mother. So that's it for this video. We'll wrap this thing up by talking a little bit about the hormones that are involved here in a little bit more detail. And then we'll talk about parturition and lactation. And that'll be it. So thank you for your attention.